wanted to keep a couple $1 million that has historically gone to the parks and libraries in Cabell County for more than 50 years. Well, the citizens took exception to that, and last May, for the first time ever, the school excess levy was voted down. And then in November, after the school board saw the error of their ways, the levy was overwhelmingly approved. And here we are today with that problem solved for the moment and a whole raft of new problems, primarily school funding in public education in a state that is demographically challenged and currently has leadership that doesn't think public education is a good thing. So what we've got tonight are two people, two here and one on the way. Wonderful people from the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy, Sarah Duncan and Tamaya Browder. They've taken a deep dive into school funding, the Hope Scholarships, what that is already doing to our state public education, and what it's going to do when it goes statewide very soon. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty. But before Sarah begins, I would like to give a shout out to the First Congregation United Church of Christ, where we're having our meeting. They have been excellent hosts because they have great technology. That's why we're Facebook live streaming as we speak. I appreciate that, and it's good to see that some institutions in Huntington support the public's right to know, public education, and making Huntington a better place for everybody. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys.
All right, this is my first time speaking from a pulpit, so I feel pretty important. Thank you so much for having us. Again, thank you for letting us use this space. This is gorgeous. So my name is Sarah Duncan. I'm the Public Education Campaign Coordinator. So my job is outreach and getting in touch with communities, trying to get information out there about policies that are affecting public education. And I'm here with Tamaya Browder, one of our policy analysts. Her job is to do all the hard work and find all that information. And then we have another lady that is on her way, Kat Curry. She's kind of doing a special project with us where we're trying to collect public education stories. I think that, just in my opinion, public education is doing a lot of really great things and we don't brag on it enough. But we'd also like to collect stories from people who are parents, people, grandparents, community members, anyone that has something they'd like to say and share with other people. And also stories of things that people are afraid of losing, because a lot of school closures, a lot of positions cut, a lot of good things we want for our kids feel like they're slipping away in a lot of places. But anyway, so Together for Public Schools is a project of the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy. Our website is down there at the very bottom. There's a sign-in sheet if you would like to sign that at some point. End is fine. And a little checkbox if you want to get signed up for our newsletter. I try to put out education articles and updates on our new research every couple of weeks. And that bumps up to weekly during legislative session. It gets pretty intense. And then there's a couple other articles over there you might find interesting. One of them is our kids count info that has a lot of numbers and statistics on the state of kids basically in Cabell County, and a recent article by Tamaya looking at some Cabell County education numbers. All right, I'm ready for the next. The West Virginia Constitution promises a thorough and efficient system of free schools. But across the state, local school systems are seeing an accelerating number of closures and consolidations, as well as staffing and program cuts. Sorry, I'm not used to this level of technology. So compared to bordering states, West Virginia spends less per pupil on public education than any state in our region, except for Kentucky. West Virginia spends about $1,000 less per pupil on instructional services than the national average, and $2,000 less per pupil on student support staff. Compared to bordering states, on average, elementary educators make about $45,000 annually, and secondary educators about $55,500, the lowest average in our region by a significant margin. I'm imagining Cabell County experiences educator loss due to this sometimes. I know in Mingo County we experience that, and in the Eastern Panhandle, they don't have enough educators to fill the spots. It's become an emergency. Teacher pay in West Virginia ranks so far below that of any neighboring state that qualified teachers could cross the state border and increase their pay by as much as 50%. Compared to bordering states, the average annual wage for a school bus driver in West Virginia is $30,580, far below the average wage nationally in any state in our region. All right, so I'm seeing the trend all over the state. I'm sure you've seen a lot of news articles. 25 schools proposed for closure this year, a bunch more that are going to be proposed or re-proposed again next year. Tons of positions that were cut, many counselors and student support positions particularly. Why is it happening now? So one of the reasons is the end of the ESSER or COVID funding. That money had to be spent by a certain date. A lot of that money was used for student support, right? So a lot of counties hired more counselors, more aides, just more nurses, social workers, etc. But that money's gone. Some people say, well, you shouldn't have spent temporary money for positions, but that was encouraged, and I think a lot of students benefited from it. Problem is, there's no funding for it anymore. Another thing is the outdated school funding formula. There are several places in the school funding formula that could really be modernized, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And the Hope Scholarship Voucher Program. You've probably seen that mentioned in the news as well. Right now, that program has some limitations on who can join and enroll in that program, but if nothing changes legislatively, that program will become universal, meaning any student K through 12 could apply. So likely increasing the numbers. All right, public education and the West Virginia school funding formula. So how does the funding formula work? I cannot read those words. Too small for me. I might have to pull out my computer. I thought about doing that anyway, but I turned 40 this year. My eyes aren't maybe up to par. There we go. All right. So school funding formula. You have staff salaries and benefits added to transportation costs, operations and maintenance costs, instructional programs and technology, plus professional growth. That equals your total foundation allowance. You subtract local contributions, which is revenue raised from property taxes, and that equals your state aid allowance. This is the amount of funding allocated to each school district from the state. School districts can also receive supplemental funding for increased enrollment, student transfers, alternative education programs, limited English proficiency programs, and students with high acuity needs. So some of the concerns with what we have right now. Obviously, we have enrollment issues in West Virginia because partially we have declining population, right? And as enrollment and funding have declined, those fixed costs remain the same. So an example of that, you might have a building that was built for 500 students, but you only have 200 students in it. You're still probably spending about the same amount on electricity and things like that, right? You still need a principal at that school. If the bus driver has to drive down to the end of the road to pick up one student, that costs just as much money as if they had stopped a few more times and picked up several more students on the way, right? So that money just goes a lot further when you have more students, which means you have more money to spend on the extras, right? Those curriculums, those extra programs. School districts receive the same amount of funding for each student, regardless of individual student need. So when we say this, that means a high poverty student, for example, might need more resources to reach the same educational attainment that a student that was not high poverty. Or a student with special needs would likely need more resources and would cost more to educate. And public schools accept all of these students. On average, high poverty districts receive about $281 less per student than low poverty districts. That's a little upside down. Here's a QR code. I don't know if that is scannable up there, but just some basic stats. 23.7% of Cabell County children are living in poverty, 25% statewide. This may be a bit higher now. These numbers are the most recent we could get from 2023, but this will be updated again in a couple of months. 1 in 5 Cabell County children are food insecure, 1 in 5 statewide. 22.7% of students in Cabell County have special needs, 19.7% statewide. So some things that would be very helpful, modernize the formula. So adopt a weighted calculation for higher poverty school districts to help reduce funding disparities. Increase the number of support personnel positions funded per 1,000 students. I think our legislators tried to do this year. It didn't really work, but some of them had their hearts in the right places, I think. Increase the number of professional educator positions funded per 1,000 students. Lower class sizes, right? That always benefits students. Adopt weighted funding to provide additional funding for student groups that require more resources. And adopt accountability and transparency measures to promote equitable funding and resource allocation statewide and within school districts. I'm going to let Tamaya come up and speak about the Hope Scholarship. She has done a lot of amazing research on this, and I'm just going to mention, if you're really interested in school funding formula, we're going to be having a webinar June 17th where she's really going to dig into this if you're very much interested in that.
Yeah, before I dive into the Hope Scholarship, I really hope y'all are able to join us for that webinar. Like that infographic that you saw a couple slides ago explaining the funding formula, that's the pretty version of it. When you go and look at it, it's step 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A. It's so many steps in it. And so it's really great to be able to take a closer look at that and see how it really plays out day to day for folks across our state. So starting off with the Hope Scholarship, I forgot I'm not advancing those slides. But the Hope Scholarship Program, if you don't know about it, it's a voucher program that uses public funds that are funded by you all, by taxpayers, to allow folks to pursue non-public education. So private schools, homeschool, micro school options. Our program is considered to be a voucher plus because it's pretty wide ranging in what you can spend that money on. I mean, recently the Hope Scholarship Board had to put out an announcement saying that, hey, we actually approved that you guys could buy tadpoles with this money. Never mind, we can't. That's actually against the law. You can't buy tadpoles. So there's a really wide-ranging use of these funds, from 3D printers and other equipment that typically you might not necessarily need at home, and that folks in traditional schools probably aren't able to get anyway with the funding that they have available to them. But the Hope Scholarship Program in our state has really been, has ballooned over the past couple years. This program started up back in 2022 to the 23 school year. In that first year, the program only cost about $9 million. It was only about 2,000 students. In 4 years, when we're looking to expand this program in 2026, we're looking at $315 million. So I can't imagine going from 9 million to 315 million. But partly it's due to huge growth in participation. So many people are participating in this program. It's growing year to year. And in 2026, it's going to expand to everyone, all school-age children in the state. Right now, you have to be a West Virginia resident. You have to have attended public school for at least 45 days. Unless you're in kindergarten or going into kindergarten, then you can just, skip, go, hop on over to a private school if you don't want to pursue public school. So the program is growing tremendously, and we don't have the money to fund it. Right now, this year, they actually had to use quite a bit of one-time money from surplus funds, lottery funds, to make sure that this program could work next year. And if it keeps growing, this is a pool of money that isn't guaranteed for next year. So how are you going to be able to continue to fund this while it's pulling from those public resources available to fund public education and other public goods? So as they keep pulling from that pool of public money, all of our other public goods are at risk and have a huge chance of reduced spending, reduced investment. And at the end of the day, we really need to maintain our public school system because it's guaranteed in our Constitution for our children. So where are your dollars going? For the most part, they are staying here in the state of West Virginia, but we do have some funds that are actually leaving the state. So $1 million went to out-of-state schools last year. That's triple the amount from the previous year. So there's growth in that, and more people using this money to pursue schools out of state. For the most part, these are online schools. They're based elsewhere, but at the end of the day, these are West Virginia funds that are leaving West Virginia. And it's a wide range of states, as you can see. Some of them are our neighbors, but we have a couple that are a little more far-ranging, Florida and New Mexico. I don't know how West Virginia money ended up all the way there, as well as about $6 million that went to unaccredited schools. So these are schools that may not be held to the same standard as public schools, as far as their curriculum, what are they teaching, how are their educators trained and qualified, as well as, is this a financially stable institution? Is this school going to be able to stay open? That's not necessarily something that an unaccredited school has to prove. And who really benefits from this Hope Scholarship Program? With these voucher programs here in West Virginia and across the country, this is really going to folks that typically they would have already pursued private school. For the most part, it doesn't provide that much money for anyone that isn't able to afford private school already. So the annual Hope Award is about $2,000 less than the average private school tuition across the state. And then you have some schools on the lower end, about $4,200, and then some on the higher end at over $11,000. If you're getting $5,000 a year, but you have to pay $11,000 in tuition, where is that $6,000 coming from? You most likely already had it in your pocket available to spend. And so although these programs are marketed saying that they expand school choice, for the most part, folks that use this program already had school choice. They already had the option to use their money elsewhere outside of the public school system. And we can see this even in where most of the Hope participation is. The counties that have the most private schools have the most Hope participation. If you have a private school right in your backyard, it's a lot easier to pursue that. And we can see that easily. McDowell County, they have no private schools. And guess what? They have no Hope Scholarship participants. And that's across 2 years of the program. No one in McDowell County has used the Hope Scholarship. Then you've got Kanawha County, 13 private schools. They're number one in Hope Scholarship participation across both years of the program. For the most part, people are leaning younger that use this program. So kids in kindergarten that are able to skip over that 45-day public school requirement, as well as first grade. So they're not even experiencing a public school education before those public funds are removed and allowed for them to use them elsewhere outside of that. And additionally, we have a huge accessibility concern with making sure that students have all the resources that they need when they're getting their education. Participants in this program, they waive their rights. They don't have to, they're not entitled to their disability rights when they're going to these private schools or these unaccredited schools. So you could have a student that maybe they have an IEP in place in their public school right now. If they go to that private school or a homeschool or micro school, that option isn't in place for them. They don't have that plan and that support system in place to make sure that they can be as successful as possible. But with the Hope Scholarship Program, I already told you guys, it is rapidly ballooning. The cost is growing every day. And that's partly due to year-round enrollment. You can apply for the Hope Scholarship anytime you want now. So if you want to pull your kids out of school in October and apply for the Hope Scholarship, you can do that. So that makes it really hard for our legislators to be able to budget for this program. They don't quite know how much it's going to cost. Next year, they think it's $110 million. That's not guaranteed. If there's more participation than what they've estimated, then the program's going to cost a bit more. There's no cap on how much the program can cost. Like I said earlier, going from $9 million to $315 million in a couple years, there's nothing in place that says we're going to stop when we hit 350 million or 400 million. There is no cap in place for how much money can go into this program. There are also no income limits. So we say we're expanding school choice for folks. We don't have any requirement for folks who have a certain household income. You can make $50,000 and use the Hope Scholarship. You might not be able to afford that private school. You can make $150,000 and use the Hope Scholarship. And that huge wide range of how money can be spent. It's not really limited to typical school supplies or equipment. And so there are wide ranges of how this money is being used. The Hope Scholarship Board, the Treasurer's Office, they're trying to prevent misuse of funds, but it can be really difficult when you're providing funds directly to schools in some cases, and in others, you're reimbursing parents for money that they have spent. Like I said earlier, no requirements for disability accommodations or to follow or even have in place a student's IEP or their individualized educational plan. So again, you have students, maybe they're leaving the public school system because they feel like the public school system hasn't served their student, hasn't been able to meet their needs. There's no requirement for these schools to follow any of those guidelines that might have been in place in a public school. There's nothing that requires them to make sure that your student has additional time on tests or to make sure that they have additional support from their teachers. There's nothing in place for that. We also have the spending that's going to these unaccredited schools. Like I said earlier, no guidelines really around how these schools operate, what they teach. Can they stay open? You can get the Hope Scholarship one year and your school can be closed the next year. So that is all these public funds that instead of going to the public school system where you're paying in to maintain a system, it's going to a school where it might not even be here next year. So you don't have that sustainability in place, as well as all of this money that's allowed to go out of state. At the end of the day, these are public funds put in place by you guys, by folks living here in West Virginia. And at the very least, this money should stay within the state of West Virginia. So we're already seeing the impacts of this program. It's been in place for a couple years. It's pulled millions of dollars in public funds away from public schools. And it really plays into how our funding formula works. It's mainly based around enrollment. So as school districts lose students, they lose that state support. They lose funding that they're able to receive from the state. We've lost over 5,000 students from 2023 to 2024 in our West Virginia public schools. Some of that is population loss, but we have a large portion of students that are leaving to use the Hope Scholarship. That option should be in place if you want to pursue non-public education, but public funds should stay within public schools. Many of the recent closures and consolidations across our state, they attributed it to enrollment decline. Folks across the state, district leadership, superintendents, they are calling out enrollment. They're losing students, particularly to the Hope Scholarship, and they're not getting this money back. We've had 50 closures across the state in the past 5 years. Like Sarah said earlier, we had 25 proposed this year alone. And right now we're looking at about $85 million in public funds that's been diverted due to the Hope Scholarship. So if you know the budget in your district or you have an idea of how much might be spent, just imagine where that money could have gone and what good it could have done with a public school. But taking a closer look at you guys here in Cabell County, how are we seeing these effects here? Y'all were in the top 5 for Hope participation. So across both years, there have been quite a few students that use the Hope Scholarship here in Cabell County. But participation actually doubled from the first year to the second. It more than doubled. We went from a little over 100 to almost 300 students using the Hope Scholarship. And just last year alone, there were $1.2 million in public funds that went to private schools just here in Cabell County. That's 3 times more than the first year. And $400,000 alone went to the Covenant School. I'm pointing this one out in particular. Like I said earlier, the Hope Scholarship Award isn't really enough money for people to be able to cover their private school education in most cases. At the Covenant School, their tuition is around $8,600. It's over $3,000 more than what folks will receive for the Hope Scholarship next year. So how are folks going to fill that gap? Do they already have that money available? Or does that mean they need to return to the public school system because they aren't able to cover that funding gap for their student? The huge role of enrollment really plays out here in Cabell County as well. You lost about 150 students from 2023 to 2024, and that amounts to over $800,000 in state aid that's lost to the district. Now, you all may be able to make it up. I know in reviewing and preparing the budget for next year, I believe the superintendent pointed out that without the excess levy funding, there would have been more cuts than what took place if that cushion wasn't in place for you all. But that is a local thing, these excess levies. Every county doesn't have that. They don't have that additional cushion in place to be able to cover any gaps in funding from lost state funding and lost state support. The budget cut from 2023 to 2024 was a little over $4.5 million. That amounted to quite a few transfers and reductions. When I counted it up, we were looking at over 200 transfers and reductions and terminations that were taking place here in Cabell County. A huge cut took place for counselors. And that plays into some of the things that happened during legislative session. Like Sarah said, legislators tried to take a stab at providing more funding for student support staff. In the end, it didn't really help out too much. Now it's just kind of narrowed the money available for those support staff. So school counselors, nurses, social workers, they're all kind of operating out of the same pot of money for 5 of these positions for every 1,000 students. 2 of those have to be school counselors now. So those 3, is it going to be 2 nurses and a social worker? Maybe you need more social workers in your school. That option isn't available for your state funding, so you've got to come up with that locally to be able to provide that in your school. And in Cabell County, that really played out with a huge cut for elementary counselors especially. I heard that they were cut in half. Instead of 1 for every elementary school, now it's 1 for every 2. Maybe that saves you some money, but are these counselors able to provide all the services that these students need when they're split across these 2 schools? Who is going to get the most benefit? Are they all going to be able to be served equally and get everything that they need? Okay, so diving into our next portion, like I said earlier, school choice has always existed for folks. Parents have always had the option to leave the public school system and go elsewhere. But with the Hope Scholarship and voucher programs, the big concern is that these are public funds. These are taxpayer funds that are going outside of the public school system. This money is accountable to you all. You paid into it with your income taxes and property taxes. And anytime you go to the store and buy anything, you have paid into this huge pot of funds that are funding what are supposed to be your public goods and services. And that accountability isn't there for these non-public schools. The public school system is the only system that is accountable to you all for how they operate and how they use those funds. So, yes, homeschool, micro school, private, all of that. Definitely. So she asked if homeschool parents and students are able to benefit from the Hope Scholarship, and they are. Any non-public school track is allowed to use the Hope Scholarship. So homeschool, micro schools, and private schools. A micro school is really a homeschool setting, just more in a group setting. It could be a group of, homeschool parents that have decided to pursue that option together. Yeah, like a co-op. Oh, for later years. Would that? No, that is a little further back. I think I skipped over that. So how did they come up with this $315 million price tag for the Hope Scholarship when it expands in 2026? They projected if all current private school students and homeschool students use the Hope Scholarship addition to what they estimated current Hope Scholarship students were, they added that all up to about 54,000 students. And the Hope Scholarship Award is based on the average state aid that they provide in public schools. And so they can kind of project how much they would typically provide in state aid. That's how they figure out how much is going to each student per year. So like 55, I think it's supposed to be about 5,500 in 2026, because next year is about 5,200. So 54,000 students, about $5,500 each, and that's how they came up with that $315 million. But again, it's just an estimate. Right. Yeah. So even over these first three years now that this program has been in place, we've seen that the estimates that they have for the Hope Scholarship Program, folks are exceeding it year to year. It keeps happening. This year alone, oh man, they budgeted about 48 million for the Hope Scholarship, and we estimate that it's going to end up at about $52 million this year. So that's a $4 million budget gap that they were not prepared for. So far, these estimates have really not caught up to the actual participation in the program. Yes. Yes. Not necessarily. So, right, the Hope Scholarship Award is based off the amount that they give for each student each year is based off of the amount that the state would typically provide for each student if they were within the public school system. So although if the program grows, there's less money available in the budget, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to reduce that award that they provide for each student. That's how it impacts the reduction in funding for school districts in the following year. So if a student leaves the public school system, that loss comes to those public schools the following school year when their enrollment is calculated again and they get their new state aid. But yeah, the big concern, you really hit it right on the head about if more people keep using this program, how are they going to pay for it? Are they still going to get the same amount of money? Right now, the expectation is the award is going to keep growing. It's grown every year so far that it's been in place. So if this year they had to use these one-time funds and surplus funds, how are we going to keep funding this program? No problem. There was some discussion on the House floor about that during session when they were approving some of that extra money for it. There was definitely some discussion around how is this program going to be sustainable? How can we fund it? But there is definitely a lot around the idea that this program has been promised to people here in the state and being able to maintain that for folks. But speaking of our legislators, with accountability, like I said earlier, the public school system is the only one that's accountable to you all as residents of the state, as taxpayers here. So if you see the slide taking a look at Davis Elementary, just showing some of the assessment results. You can go on to Zoom WV and look up any school in our state if you want to see how many students are enrolled, how do they perform on testing, what's student discipline numbers, graduation rates, anything like that. You can go on that website and look at it whenever you want to. If you want to see how private schools are doing, that's not available to you. This is the transparency. This is the data available when we're looking at these non-public school options. They aren't accountable to us. There's nothing in place that requires them to provide this information for all of you. If this money is being spent, you paid into it, you can't necessarily find out what are the results of that spending. And so this bill actually was a big focus during session, Senate Bill 914, that actually reduced accountability measures for private and parochial schools. So the bar already isn't super high for how transparent this data and information has to be to you all. Like I said, you can't just go on a website and figure out how the Covenant School is performing here in Huntington. And legislators actually work to reduce that, to lower those transparency and accountability measures. And so this bill did pass, and it actually now removes the requirement for non-public schools to maintain testing above a certain level. So previously, they had to maintain testing above the 40th percentile. If they fell below that level, they were accountable to the state to put programs in place to improve that. And if they didn't improve that, then they could lose their status as a registered non-public school here in our state. That measure is gone now. So the state, there's no requirement. They still have to get that testing information, but there's no requirement in place for these schools to perform above a certain level. There's nowhere for the state to step in if they feel like this school isn't performing well or that they aren't serving their students well. That's not a measure that's in place now. Yes. That is looking at the composite scores. So with that, they're really just grouping up by grade level, how they performed, and that's it. So yeah, not looking at individual student performance. So that is another aspect of that. There was also another part in play. We mostly talked about private schools, micro schools, these schools as well, but charter schools and the growing charter school system in our state is another concern, because again, we have this limited pool of resources, this pot of public money. And if we're using it elsewhere, that's, we're diverting these funds from the public school system. And so Senate Bill 227, it passed during the second special session back in 2024, and it now allows taxpayer funds from the school building authority that would usually go to public schools for them to maintain. That's now allowed for charter schools to purchase school buildings. There were quite a few bills that actually looked at kind of expanding the options available for charter schools here in our state. But this is just an extension of the strategy to hurt public education, because again, we are seeing disinvestment of resources that would typically go to the public school system that are now going elsewhere. And we're not able to strengthen the public school system. We're not able to meet the growing needs of students here in our state. About half of students in public schools in our state are considered living in low-income families. About 20% of students have disabilities or receiving special education services. So there is a distinct need that students have. They need these resources for them to be able to succeed in the future. And if we continue to divert these resources elsewhere, we might see some changes in those student outcomes over time. So this is what we have to say for lawmakers. First, we need to halt the expansion of the Hope Scholarship that's slated for 2026 to expand to all school-age children in the state. That is a $315 million price tag that we do not have the money to cover. We also need to implement reasonable guardrails on the Hope Scholarship program, cost caps, enrollment caps, making sure that there is a limit on how many students can participate and how much can be spent on this program, as well as income limits for applicants, comprehensive public reporting, because we don't know how these schools are performing with our public funds through the Hope Scholarship, as well as location and accreditation requirements for schools. They should at least have to be in the state of West Virginia if they're going to get West Virginia money. We also need to implement equity-based funding practices. So like Sarah talked about the school funding formula earlier, we see high poverty districts that are getting the short end of the stick. They have less funding than lower poverty districts that probably have the ability to raise additional funding themselves to cover the needs of their students. So we need to put these practices in place to make sure that all students in our state have access to a quality public education, regardless of their background, regardless of their student status, because at the end of the day, we promised it in the state constitution. Oh, and then if you are super interested, if this sparks something in you about school funding, you want to learn more about the funding formula and how this plays out across our state, please join us on June 17th at 6 for a webinar. I'm going to dive all in, nerd out with you guys, and we're really going to go in depth into the funding formula just to kind of demystify it a little bit and show how it works day to day, how it impacts folks across our state, and how students can really be served better by the funding formula if we make some drastic changes.
I just want to mention Pat is here. When I mentioned that project, oh, sorry. Pat is here at that. If you would like to, well, there we go. If you would like to talk about public education or tell a story or get in touch with her later to do something like that, we would love that. I think it's really helpful. You know, Tamaya talked a lot about policies and money and numbers, but I think it's about access, right? It's about access to education. And for a lot of kids, the Hope Scholarship Voucher Program is creating less access to education. You know, you have to ask yourself, how is it financially possible for a private school or, you know, some of these other groups to come in and stay open with less money, maybe in a lot of cases, than a public school would receive? And the answer is they don't have to provide the same services. They don't have to hire certified special education teachers. They don't have to serve lunch. They don't have to offer transportation. So those kids that most need access to those services, they don't get it. Was it last year there were 0 Hope Scholarship recipients from McDowell County?
Both years, yeah.
0. Almost 90% of parents and kids rely on public schools. A lot of our kids need to be fed. They need that bus ride to school. They need an IEP in some cases. And the Hope Scholarship Voucher Program is decreasing that access because it's basically escalating the rate of school closures. It's causing, you know, counselors and teachers to be laid off at a faster rate. And that's the kids that most rely on those services that need it. Yeah.
I know a math teacher, and she said that partially through the school year, she's gotten some of these kids back, and they're like way behind in the math, so then that public school teacher has to run even harder, not bringing up speed, and I guess when they've got the test scores, they've got to worry about, and do the get any money back?
As far as the re-enrolling of students who have been homeschool or private school, I've heard that several times now about teachers having to go back and sort of remediate. As far as funding, they do have to get partial
Yes,
funding
that
back, right?
there is like a partial refund process if a student returns to public school, discontinues the Hope Scholarship, but it's a matter of if getting that money back, getting it back from the
And it's a
student
partial.
account.
It's not a full amount. It's
Right.
like in fractions, and it takes man hours for the public school systems to go back and, you know, even amongst themselves sometimes between counties, they have to go back and figure out all this funding.
Right, because
So-
the money may be going back to the state. Is it necessarily going back to that district where the student returned? Possibly not.
Some other things, you know, Tamaya mentioned SB 914, that bill that lowered the testing requirements for private schools. That particular bill was brought up by a legislator who runs a private school. And he said directly during our legislative session, during the hearing for the Education Committee, that they did not admit students with IEPs because it brought down their test scores. I mean, that's something that gets glossed over a lot. So like Tamaya said, this is benefiting a population that mostly already has access and taking away from the ones that don't.
And also
We try, and I would say it feels like kids are coming to us with more and more needs, but you're trying to meet those needs with fewer and fewer resources every year. Did anybody else have questions? You can come up here and speak if you're brave, or if not, I can repeat it. Well, I really appreciate you all coming out. We can hang out and chat for a few minutes. There are some flyers over here with some interesting info. I would encourage you, visit our website. You can sign up for our newsletter. Together for Public Schools is on Facebook. We share things on there. I don't know if you could tell, I forgot to mention it. I was a public school teacher up until very recently, so I've done that for over 10 years. Yeah. So I forgot to mention much about West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy, but we have a lot of donors, and we do not get any federal or government assistance. So donors, and we are a nonprofit, and we can't engage in politics. So we don't receive or give any political funds either. So our goal is advocating for policies that benefit average West Virginians. So this is one thing that we do. Public education has become a big push for us. That's probably 20% of our staff now, right?
Yeah, now that we have you.
Well,
we outnumber
some a little
everybody
bit too.
else.
Yeah. So that's what we do. Our goal is kind of to go out and educate people and arm them with accurate information.
Yeah, and I'll just add, because we really are on a timeline with this expansion coming up in 2026. We've got one legislative session, regular legislative session left before that expansion takes place. And so now is really the time for folks, if you do not want this program to keep going, if you don't want it to grow, now's the time to take action, because we're looking at a huge, huge cost to the state and a huge loss of funds for public schools.
Well, and it's not just school funding. There's other issues. There's PEIA that needs to be paid for. That has never gotten, a regular funding source. And with things like Hope Scholarship pulling out more money, I don't know how you achieve that. You have salary raises. Not sure that's going to happen, So you've got a lot of issues that weren't really figured out this session. But I do think that there is opportunity in that. I think several legislators did notice that, hey, this is kind of escalating a little bit out of control. I think Roger Hanshaw mentioned it in the media, and several others pointed it out. I think we have a legislator here tonight. Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for coming. Okay. Well, thank you. We were just going over Hope Scholarship, school funding formula, how all those things work. And I mentioned we're having a more in-depth webinar about those things. But if you would like to speak, we gave the public an opportunity to speak, and you can feel free to say anything you would like as well. Yeah, they're live streaming for us if you'd like.
Again, thank you all. Like I said, I have a standing engagement on Thursdays until July is here from 6 to 8. And so try to get here as soon as I could. But really, I wanted to come and just sort of listen and see what you all are feeling. I am at ground zero in the legislature. And this is a big issue to me. So much so that I have tried through actual standalone bills and an amendment to, at bare minimum, stop the resources, your taxpayer dollars, from leaving the state. That has, as you all know, fallen upon deaf ears. And so, I am in a position to where I know that this is their baby because it flies under the banner of school choice. And so, I don't know if we'll get to a point, especially during this current gubernatorial tenure, that's just not going to be pulled off the books, right? And so I'm coming at it from a pragmatic standpoint of how can we at least slow the bleeding and save our schools, save resources for our students. And you all know That's the reason, some of the reason why some of our teachers got ripped and transferred because of those resources. So again, I'm really here just wanting to listen, brought my padfolio to take notes and to, try to take something back to the legislature. I can tell you that at least my caucus, the Democrat caucus in the House, we are very much committed into seeing what we can do to not just stop the bleeding from hope, but we've always been proponents of public education. And so we are standing, like I said, right at the in the battle lines on that. And I just want to be collaborative, hear what you all are thinking. There might be some other issues outside of hope, maybe that I'm not aware of on the ground or something like that. I think I am, but I might not be, right? And so just want to be open and hear what you all are thinking, and try to take something back and try to get something done. So, and also, do you all have any questions for me? I'll try. Like I said, I came here wanting to be a scribe and just take notes, but to the best of my ability, if there is a question that you have, would love to take a shot at. Yes, ma'am, Linda.
So did you hear the job concern about this issue?
Um, and so I will say this, and hopefully I'm not out of school. Roger is an advocate for public schools. Roger's in a very precarious situation. I can't speak to how he operates personally, which might differ than my style. But how should I articulate this? I don't think Roger is moving with his personal wishes for public education. I'll say that. And so I did not hear specifically, and I'm not saying that he didn't, about, the resources and all those things. But I do know through conversations that he is very much an advocate of public schools. But also, even though I am infatuated with Huntington and from here my whole life, I also feel like I'm from Missouri and the Show Me State, right? So at some point, it can't just be words. It's got to be actions. And I do think that we have a contingency of folks that are upset with that. But if I'm just being frank, and I think you all see it all the time, we do have a lot of, I'm just going to say it, politicians who go against what they want to do and what they know is right, all for the love of power. And currently, right now, the power lies in those who put, quote unquote, and I want to say quote unquote, school choice on a pedestal. Because while I'm not against that, I've said from the very forefront, there's a way that we can achieve this, but I don't believe it should be to the detriment of public education. And so that's where I hang my hat on. So hopefully, Roger is able to corral some of his caucus and do that. But then, the other issue is that, what's the Senate going to do? Because that's something that has to pass both chambers. I'm not aware of where President Smith is on this, but I do know, and I've heard it from several folks, not just what I would call inside the bubble, but this is the first time in either a long time or ever that we are considered the upper chamber now. All right, the House. For all the, I know, right? I always thought we were anyway. But for everything that's been going on, and so I can't really speak to that. Maybe my counterpart, Senator Wolple, could maybe give you some better insight to that. But it is going to have to be a game of ping pong and seeing what both chambers can do with that. So, yes, sir.
I know the governor's has was going to call a special session.
Mhm.
Sometime this summer. He says he's going to fix the school funding formula. Have you heard anything?
So what I have, yes and no. I haven't heard much, but that also mirrors some of my counterparts who sit across the aisle from me from a party affiliation standpoint and in leadership. That I've heard a couple things. One is I've heard that we might not have a special session. The other is that they believe that it will be post-August. And post-August because we still have a lot of payments out there because the fiscal year ends in July. And so it would make the most sense if we were going to do it to actually do it sometime in August or later. And so that's what I've heard. I know, and so I also, my sentiments are, obviously we need to do something, and I've put forth legislation before to try to help chisel away at the issue with PEIA, and there are others that have done that. However, I am not excited about tackling PEIA in a special session because I don't feel we're going to give it the just due. I feel like it's going to be, and I hope I'm wrong. I feel like it would be more of a dog and pony show. And we do a measure that's maybe a one-time money, make you happy for a year. Oh, by the way, it's 2026 when you're happy. And then we're right back in 2027 with issues again. It needs a structural fix. I have said on multiple news outlets and media when I've been questioned over the past month and a half that I want to do something. I want to do something now, but I do feel that this is something that deserves. I always talk about priorities. I've screamed that from the mountaintops for probably about 3 years now, and I just believe that the priority needs to be, or at least one of the what I would call my top 5, is PEIA and that promise to state workers. It needs to be done during a regular session, and there needs to be a lot of work done in interims leading up to a regular session, and we prioritize that and give it, like I said, give it what it really deserves. Because if we're going to do a special session, the facts remain that it's probably going to be 3 days. I would say that to be fiscally responsible, do it during interims, but it's going to be 3 days. It's probably never going to be longer than a week unless we're dealing with some type of, other budget issue. And so again, I don't think it lends its hand to having a proper fix to it. And, my suggestion would be that you have all stakeholders involved, including the consumer, what I would call the consumer, the people, the workers, and you come with a collaborative approach. I think there's some things that can be done, with the PBMs. I think it might take an innovative look at seeing how we expand the universe, with insurance risk management. If you're to expand the universe of a pool of people, that is maybe one way to drive costs down. I think we should be creative in looking at maybe how do we do that. I know Express Scripts, we should probably take a look at that contract with them for sure. We are currently, I believe, paying 110% of Medicaid with that to I guess you would say the hospitals. I know I'll probably get raked over the coals for that, but I think that should be on the table and looking at that. I'm not saying that we go to $100 for dollar, but if we're having issues, maybe we need to take a look at that. So I'm getting long-winded. I apologize. But at the end of the day, I would really love to just give it what it deserves and not do a rush job just to say we did it, pat ourselves on the back, and go away to another year where it's just going to spike. Because you're always going to have natural healthcare inflation. That's going to happen. I think it runs probably about in between 11 and 12%. That's normal. But again, it is the promise to state workers, while a lot of people, went that route to have a better benefit package. I just think that's fair. So I don't know if that gave you what you wanted on the question when we'll have it, but that's my take. I do not have anything concrete. If I were to get something in my email, I will let you all know. What are the questions? Was there anything else discussed outside of PEIA? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. And Center for Budget, correct? Center for Budget? Yeah. And I'm very appreciative of you all. That is a invaluable resource that you all are. I always tell people, and Adam's maybe heard this from me before, if you ever get before a representative or quote unquote politician that tells you they know all the answers, run for the hills, because we don't. And so I lean a lot on you all's expertise and you all's due diligence and research to help guide us and figure out those things. So also thank you because you all have been a big help to me since I've been there. So awesome. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Which I would have to look back at my notes. Off the top of my head, I do not. But I can get that answer in very short order for you. Remind me again, we had so much stuff before us. Which number is it? Was it 32?
The summary of it is that there was supposed to be, it was supposed to provide funding initially for one counselor for every 2 weeks, 300.
Yes.
High school, and then a little higher than elementary. But then it got wrapped into this piece.
It got wrapped in that bill to where there was actually less.
And it doesn't, initial funding. And
Correct.
it's now 1 to 500.
It expanded. Correct. So I mean, I don't like it, but
I didn't know, like, if there was a discussion on how that probably.
I mean, I don't want to be facetious. Resources are going elsewhere. Other questions? Any?
Questions for any of our subject matter experts? I would encourage everyone to sign in there so we can grow our network.